Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Fabrizio. I'm a comic book creator. I create Horace H. Hoover. So I write, draw, ink, color, letter, and worry over Horace H. Hoover. It's a sort of a 1920s occult detective, and it kind of pulls from pulp, a little bit of horror, a little bit of, I mean, maybe a little Mr. Bean or Douglas Adams kind of stuff. Um, and he sort of travels all these pocket universes and solves mysteries, whether it's supernatural, occult. Um, right now, it's currently a 5-issue miniseries, and I'm working on issue 4 right now. So that's what I do 24/7. My day job is I'm a programmer, so the comic book thing comes next.
So your goal was, let's try and get out of this field that's going to be taken over by AI and into another one that doesn't make any money.
That's exactly my thought. Yeah. I'm like, well, if the software thing doesn't work out, I'll have this other job taken over by AI. Why not? Next thing I'll go into is fast food or something where robots will take over. I don't know.
Right on. Well, how did you find your way here? We were talking a little bit before this, and you sound like you're like me. You're not natively a superheroes guy, and superheroes are what people think of when they think of comic books. But I've never been one of those people. I like the weird stuff that you could get away with storytelling wise in comics for years.
Yeah, I like to pull from not just comics. So yeah, even though I did read superhero comics growing up, as soon as things like Sin City or Hellboy or The Goon, as soon as that stuff kind of came out, it allowed me to kind of refocus. I'm like, oh, you know what? Maybe I can do comics even though I'm not into superheroes. So once that sort of opened up the field, I pulled from movies, literature, like just aesthetically all the things that I like and kind of crammed it into the book. But I have nothing against superheroes. Again, I grew up on them. The storytelling I still appreciate. So the narrative storytelling, the visual storytelling. So I use that part of it, the Claremont stuff, the Kirby stuff, and then I sort of put it in a different context with more horror, sort of occult stuff.
Okay. And so let's get to the real pitch here, the fundamental of this. Describe for my audience the hero of Horace H. Hoover.
Sure. So Horace H. Hoover wears something that looks suspiciously like a vacuum cleaner on his head. And, to describe his character, he is optimistic, positive. He's very vocal about everything he's thinking at any given time. He really just takes things as they come. So whether it's a ghost or a dragon or a world devouring monster, he's going to kind of look at it just as a problem to solve. So he's kind of like a mix between, we'll say, Sherlock Holmes and Inspector Clouseau or something like that.
Okay. Well, I like you bring up the word hope, because one of the big criticisms that we have of like the modern comic book is that like the nihilism that kind of started creeping in the 80s just kind of took over everything. And certainly the stuff that makes it to TV and movies at this point is all very dark. It's very nihilistic in what it is. So I know there is certainly an audience for people that have been looking for comic books to be something where you can find hopeful heroes again. Now, is that something that you just did on purpose, or something you said, look, I know that the market's looking for this, so we need to make sure that happens?
So I think, it was definitely organic, but as far as the market that really wants the dark, nihilistic stuff, I'm not going to lie. I gravitated towards that at a certain point, whether it was The Killing Joke or, something like Watchmen, anything by Alan Moore, really, except for his later stuff like Tom Strong or something like that. But yeah, you just kind of get mired in and you want something different. You want something more hopeful. And since I'm doing every aspect of the book and the character, you kind of live with that. So if you're doing this really dark nihilistic story and you're doing every part of it, you sort of have to live with it all day, every day. And I didn't really want to. I tell this story. So I'm a game developer and I came up with this game years ago. Really dark story. I was really excited about the gameplay and the mechanics and even the story, but it was so dark that after a couple of months, I shelved it just because it was so dark and I had to like really, I didn't want to think about it all day long. So, eventually Horace came along. The character kind of popped into my head. I'm doing these sketches and it just emerged, but it wasn't a specific thing like, okay, the market is headed this way. I'm going to go that way, either contrarian or kind of go along with it.
Just happened to be where everybody else was at the time. Like this is kind of well, I can definitely vouch for anyone who thinks that like, oh, there's no such thing as too much horror. I am a horror guy. I've been a horror guy my whole life. If you look back there's entire shelves of just horror movies. A couple of years ago, friends of mine said, "Hey, we're going to do this thing. We're going to do 100 nights of horror." And so it started in July. I ended up doing 105 nights um, of horror movies, and I will tell you, psychologically, it messes you up. Like you're just what goes in definitely affects you. So I do every year. I'll do 31 nights, and like I'll do like little short videos for them of reviewing the movies I watch and put them up on YouTube. But there's no input that's good for a person.
That's impressive. I mean, 105 nights. Like, how long did it take afterwards to sort of like get back to like normal where you weren't imagining like,
It was a couple months. I mean, it wasn't like I was imagining things. What it is just there's a general unease that you just get when you're mired in it. And as much as I love the stuff, I would never tell anyone to not be in it because it's been so formative for me growing up. But you got to understand like a time and a place, and you really do need to have other emotions out there.
yeah, I feel like that way with music. I listen to a lot of like metal or hardcore and sometimes I'm like, you know what? I'm going to pop in The Cure. And then 5 minutes later, I'm like, that was a bad idea. I should not be listening to The Cure. That's coming out. So yeah, like you said, whatever goes in, it definitely kind of like adjusts you and your mentality and your mood to some degree. Horror is a whole extreme sort of thing though.
Well, it's funny because it's like I even made it like a point. I'm like, okay, well, there's no way I can do all like put in as much horror comedy as I can to kind of to balance some of like the emotion. But like, I mean, even in the horror comedy stuff, we're still watching people get dismembered a lot. So it's like it's it's still just graphic stuff that your brain doesn't necessarily know how to deal with entirely.
Yeah, that's interesting. As far as comics, I don't know. I always felt like comics were my safe place to look at horror because I'm not a big horror guy. The movies are kind of hard for me to watch. Some I like, some I don't. It's weird for me sometimes. Some things bother me. But like I'm like, oh, you know what? Comic books, I can kind of look at anything if it's in a comic book format. So I do like horror in comic books, but as soon as it gets on the screen and it's a little too real, it's just a different animal, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Like I grew up listening to Clive Barker. That's my guy, and so he got me into it. But even like today, like I don't know, maybe it's just getting old. I got kids of my own and stuff now, so it's just tougher to take the stuff. Like what I could do when I was 15, and like, oh, this is all just BS. Like, yeah, I've seen a few things in life now that it's maybe not as ridiculous. Some of the stuff.
When I was real young, well, not really young, like in high school, I remember I went to a party and at the time, Faces of Death was really popular. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I remember Faces of Death.
And I walked in unbeknownst to me in the middle of it and I'm scarred after that. Yeah, some things just, it affects you.
So you mentioned that you're a game developer by trade. I'm curious. What have you noticed as far as the industry goes, from games to comic books?
So as far as the games that I do, it's nothing fun. It's nothing that anybody would play. It's sort of these big companies
As I
need
say, your
things.
boss hates you right now.
I mean, these big companies need stuff for trade shows. So like mini games, like cutting edge, maybe AR, VR to get them into these booths. So it's nothing comparable to like modern games. But I will say this, the reason I got into games, so I've been programming for a very long time, but games were exciting at a certain point for me. I saw them as an avenue, like a new avenue for writing and music and really what I consider to be art. I know there's always that conversation, are games art, back and forth. But I played a few games that I really consider like art or as good as some novels I read, no doubt.